Hi there. Today on iTWireTV, we're speaking with Paulo de Matos, the Chief Product Officer for SYSPRO, about how technology can help build our sovereign manufacturing capability to ensure supply chain resilience. Now, supply chain resilience is definitely something on a lot of our companies' minds right now as we struggle with supply chain challenges. So I'm really interested, Paulo, to hear what what you have to say and what SYSPRO can offer companies in these challenges. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here and a great opportunity for us to talk about this particular topic. I think there's no question the sheer amount of disruption that the COVID pandemic brought to us, and certainly continues to do so, continues to challenge us, as sort of coming in waves. This really has been on us now for really for the last 2 years. I think as far as supply chains are concerned, there really was a sit-up moment in the market saying, we've been heavily disrupted. And what were the main reasons for those disruptions? I think we can learn a lot from that, because that will really lead us to say, well, how should we be looking to reconfigure these supply chains into the future, specifically to minimize the possible impacts of future disruptions. So there's only one guarantee. The guarantee is that supply chains will be disrupted into the future. Quite topical, I think what's happening with Ukraine and Russia, that's again going to be leading to some further disruptions. We see it in food and bev, we see it in the agriculture sector, we see it in the petrochemical sector, anything to do with plastics, manufacturing or any of those sorts of products. So we see another round of disruption just at our doorsteps. Yes, granted, this one, we'll see a lot of the input challenges. The input pricing is going to be different, but again, it's yet another disruption to supply chains. I think if we have a look at supply chains in general, the first thing to say we have seen over the last couple of decades was a race to the bottom. It was a case about trying to configure these supply chains to be the cheapest, most economical, most efficient methods of bringing a complete product to market across all of the different stakeholders. And we saw this elongation of the supply chains with more and more nodes. So the length of the supply chains were longer. And certainly over the last decade, a lot of the buffers between each of the stakeholders were removed, purely because economically they were wanting to reduce waste. It seemed like the good idea at the time. But of course, with that, any disruption that happens on this elongated chain means that everyone is going to be affected. And it's a bullwhip effect. Ultimately, the customer is going to be affected, or the consumer is going to be affected right at the end of the chain. So looking at it and saying, well, what were predominantly some of the main reasons? The first was companies adopted a policy of only sourcing from a single supplier. That made sense. They built out economies of scale with that single supplier. So I think over the last 2 years, and we've done a lot of surveying out, global surveys out in the market, we're seeing that companies are now looking at multi-sourcing strategies, and that builds a level of resiliency that says, if I cannot source something from a single supplier, I've got alternate sources that are there ready baked for me to utilize. And likewise, sourcing from different geolocations, that's also very important. So we do see that there has been a shift in thinking to looking at local sourcing, and also to begin to reshoring some of those manufacturing capabilities back in nation. So I think those are some elements that I guess begins to give us a level of resiliency that we didn't have in the past. The second component of the supply chain disruptions was really about the fact that these companies spun off some of what they classified as their non-value adding activities, and they spun that off to subcontractors or to suppliers. So we are also seeing a shift where companies are now saying that we need to bring in, because if we can look after those that manufacturing component too, or that distribution or logistics component too, it means that we have a higher degree of control over our destiny to be able to supply into our customers. So we are seeing that we typically companies were beginning to be very narrowly focused on only a single set of activities and doing them the most efficiently that they possibly can. They're saying, well, we need to actually own that which constitutes the complete delivery into our customers. So that's another big shift. So we are seeing a contraction of that supply chain, we expect it. That normally happens when we're faced with the amount of disruptions that we have seen. That's what I call the caterpillar effect. You see a caterpillar is nice and long, you touch it and it immediately shrinks down, and that's what we are experiencing. But that in itself only solves one part of the puzzle, and I guess it gets to your broader question. What can we do, certainly from an Australian perspective, to ensure that we limit the possibilities or the impact of future disruptions? Because that's a guarantee. There will be future disruptions in the supply chain. And so the second thing is about how we actually engage with all the stakeholders in that supply chain. One of the big departure points from how companies thought about how they deal with suppliers, as an example, certainly over the last decade, has been a supplier is just a means for us to purchase the items that we require into our inputs, into our organization. When we're looking at procurement as a strategic component in a business, now it's about actually fostering a collaborative and a far more partnering with that supplier. So it's less of a supplier transacting purchase by pay the supplier type of transaction, and more about sitting down with those suppliers and saying, this is how we want to run this partnering with you. This is the visibility and the likely volumes we're going to be pushing through you. So you've got a higher level to be able to react, to plan, and to scenario planning to ensure that we can secure those components. This isn't new. This is something that has happened certainly in a lot of industries, specifically automotive. That's the way that they've conducted themselves, certainly over the last 2 decades. But we're now seeing that same approach of partnering with your suppliers a lot closer is required in order to remove one of the other reasons for the impact of disruptions to supply chains. The way that organizations such as SYSPRO can certainly help with this is how do we now take all of that information that's being provided by all the stakeholders on that supply chain as they are just going about their business as usual, and that information has got a causal effect downstream. So as it's flowing through the value chain, so if there's a disruption further up, if we get to know about it sooner, we can change and adapt and really pivot around that and see what we can do, run different planning scenarios, what we can do to react to those changes. For that, it does mean that systems need to now begin to collaborate far closer. And there's a couple of technologies out there in the market that we can make use of this. Certainly the whole concept of blockchain, distributed ledgers is an important thing. It's less about the cryptocurrency, and it's more about the fact that you've got a distributed ledger. So as each stakeholder changes, produces, plans, reacts, in their normal productions, they are inputting what the status is into this distributed ledger, and all partners have got that same view. So it's actually about a distributed database of the activities across that whole supply chain. That's critically important if we are to resolve the issues of the disrupted supply chains. So it does also mean that the systems that companies operate need to be able to plug into these blockchains and to be giving the information, the planning information, the production information, or any potential disruptions, be it logistics or be it distribution or manufacturing into it. So I think if we have a look at the Australian manufacturing environment and certainly the industries, one, it's a vast country. Yeah, you're dealing with a highly distributed network, a highly integrated network into the global supply chains, certainly because of the variety of all of the inputs. So there is an opportunity for Australian manufacturers to re-look at how they engage with the stakeholders on their supply. And it's not just, to the next tier, to the single supplier, but it's their suppliers and their suppliers, and the same on the customer side. For a long time, people have always said that, today it's not a case that a company competes against a company, a manufacturer competes against another manufacturer. Yes, this is true, but today it's about how the supply chain actually competes against a supply chain. We can see it, the Pepsi versus the Coca-Cola wars. It's how that one complete supply chain competes against the other. And that's equally, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. So the opportunity, I think, in the certainly in the Australian theatre for production is to say, one, how can we reconfigure our supply chains to make sure that we make them more resilient, make them more collaborative, and we make sure that that they provide us a lot earlier insights, because it's about, as soon as we get those centralized insights coming in, we can react to it. And then this really supports the high degree of the quality, propensity to high quality that Australian manufacturers have, the high degrees of the customer centricity and that value added componentry. Being a Western sort of first world country, it's also about ensuring that it's not just about producing volume-based manufacturing, it's that value-adding differentiated manufacturing, and that is absolutely key. So that's really the first thing I wanted to discuss. I think the second is, well, where should the local manufacturers be investing in? And that's quite an important key. Now, what's the very next step? We know that there's a vision for the future, but where should be the very next step? And we see that there's a lot of local investments taking place, and certainly the Australian government has been trying to prop up a lot of the industry with innovation grants. But the grants are important for companies to say, how best can I actually utilize this? For example, in their production manufacturing facilities, it could be a case that they're saying, well, if we replace that machine and put in a bigger, faster machine, that's only going to resolve into produce an efficiency benefit on one of the components within its production. So we need to be thinking about this a little bit more holistically. And the holistic view is switching our manufacturing model to what is a smart manufacturing model. And smart manufacturing sees the integration between machines, people, systems, and resources. And really what that does is it transforms the manufacturing from a system of record into a system of insight, and that then supports the decision-making capability. And that's where we see the real innovation taking place. Of course, this is absolutely key. We say, well, how does a small company or a medium-sized company take advantage of some of these benefits? Well, firstly, it's a well-known fact that the growth in the economies comes from the small and the medium-sized companies. So it's important that in the manufacturing sector, the shift has got to be from a level of survival, and it needs to shift to a focus of what does that smart manufacturing mean for each manufacturer. So here's a very practical example. If we have a look at, we're looking at, the first round was about automation in machinery, in manufacturing. The second round is about the integration of that automation into all the other systems. Now we're talking about the hybridization between people, processes, and machines. And with that, it allows us to get into that scenario planning. So if we just scroll back just a little and say, if we look at that together with the view of the supply chain, and we have the smart factory of the future who has visibility into the supply chain, it can be reacting and making sure that it's running optimally and efficiently in order to cater for that. And that is a very important departure point. And to be able to do that modeling and that scenario planning is an integral part of what that smart manufacturing is. And I think that is definitely something that the Australian manufacturers should be considering. Digital transformation, I think, is a hot potato. Everyone's talking about it, and it's a widely used term, but I think it needs to be contextualized into how it practically would make a difference in the lives of manufacturers. Personally, I'm of the opinion that unless you have a very specific problem you're trying to resolve, digital transformation is the answer, but you very clearly need to know what is the question. And certainly after the first round of the disruptions with the pandemic, we circled round to survey. We did two global studies. The first one was at the start of the pandemic, and the second one was 18 months in. And one of the key questions we asked was around what are the investment strategies that companies are going to be adopting in order to ensure that they've removed this disruption. And it was almost universal. Just at the start of the pandemic, we saw a high degree of commitment of organizations, manufacturers, to be investing in digital transformation initiatives. 18 months later, we questioned, how have those worked out for you? Have you received the return on it? Has your business practice improved practically? Are you seeing the returns that you expected on the ground? And there was a little bit of a degree of disillusionment on it. And we saw it in companies that basically had not considered how practically that very next digital transformation step would fit into the overall digital transformation strategy, when it was just about, we're just going to automate X, or we're just going to integrate X and Y. And they didn't have a broader digital transformation strategy that says, this is what is going to keep us competitive, innovative, efficient, and making sure that we are efficient not only from a content, innovation, specialization perspective, but also from a value-adding perspective. I think that brings us to a question as to how do we, as an industry, as a manufacturer, retain key talent in our organizations. We know about the era of the Great Resignation. Everyone has felt it and experienced it, and skills are at an all-time premium. And this is also true of the manufacturing sector. And certainly a lot of the studies that have taken place talking specifically to how do we actually retain those key talented individuals, making sure that they remain invested and subscribed into a manufacturing business. It's about providing people also with a vision as to where they see themselves in that organization, and whether they believe that organization has got viability, or they've got a real future in the market. Because people want to subscribe to something that they have almost like an inkling, or they feel part of, or it's part of their purpose. And I think that is one of the key things that people need to follow. So we need to have that digital transformation strategy. It needs to ultimately have an overarching, this is our strategy in order to achieve X, and also about what is it that you want to be recognized as in the market. And it's about that high quality, it's about that efficient value-adding manufacturer. And then it's about looking at all of the systems that can be plugged in so that it can orchestrate and provide that decision-making capability into the supply chain. And obviously there's the resiliency that companies need to change how they approach their procurement partners in the supply chain. So I think generally those are the things that companies should be focusing on, certainly to improve the efficiencies in manufacturing. And I'm very buoyant, very positive about what this outlook means for the average Australian manufacturer, the mid-tier, the small manufacturer in Australia. It's to be focusing on these things. And we have the technology base in Australia. We have the networks already available in order to support this in Australia. There's been a lot of investment into high-speed fiber and broadband. I think those are great underpinnings to be providing this integrated collaborative supply chain. And I think also just looking at the whole reshoring of some of the manufacturing capabilities that has been lost over the last couple of decades, and saying if we are going to reshore some of those capabilities that maybe has been shipped out to other countries like China or other countries in Asia, if we're going to reshore them, how would we look to reimagine that manufacturing capability today? Of course, none of this can be achieved without having the support of systems and the support of that manufacturing leadership in order to take those industries and those companies on that journey. And I think that is one of the things, the way we see ourselves at SYSPRO, and we are a global provider of an ERP system. The ERP product is what we do, it's what we've done for 43 years, but it's in how we actually engage with the industry, with the manufacturers, with our consulting and services arms, where we actually unlock the true potential of these manufacturing organizations and help them as trusted advisors to take them on this journey. And that's where we really see where we can take this journey, certainly with the Australian manufacturing industry.
Oh, it's been tremendous, Paulo. You've given me a huge amount to go on with there. That's awesome to hear what SYSPRO is doing, and also your thoughts on what companies can and should be doing and how they can absolutely use technology. I'm wondering, are there any SYSPRO customers that you'd particularly like to highlight and tell us about, and what they do that have a really strong, great SYSPRO relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to ask Marnie, who's actually been involved in quite a few of engagements with our customers in doing some of the customer case studies and certainly testimonials. Marnie, do you want to just pop in and maybe just talk about one or two of our customers that you've been working with of late?
Absolutely. So I'm going to highlight a couple of customers that we've got, B&R Enclosures up in Queensland, who are very much on their Industry 4.0 journey. As Paulo rightly highlighted before, the mixture of blending of process, people, technology, smart technology to advance the business into the next realm. So there's a video testimonial which I'll share with you, David. I think that's a really exciting customer story there on the Industry 4.0 journey. Another customer I'd like to highlight is AF Gason here in Victoria, and they're into the agriculture equipment and heaters. So they're also very much using SYSPRO ERP to manage all facets of the business, from the shop floor to the back end, and going through major change and growth from COVID and responding to the demands of changing consumer and business preferences. So I think two really exciting stories that I'll share with you later, David.
Fantastic. No, that's wonderful. That's been awesome. I appreciate you both. So that's been Paulo de Matos, Chief Product Officer for SYSPRO, and Marnie Lightbound, APAC Marketing Director for SYSPRO. Thank you both very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Only a pleasure.